The pressure built on Matthew's chest as the full weight of the animal began to bear down on him. In a desperate attempt to fight it off, Matthew began punching it in its face, clawing it on the muzzle, and trying to gouge its eyes. October 2008. Matthew Sutton, a 31-year-old father of 5, had been a hunter as long as he could remember. As well as his family life and service in the Air Force, Matthew also loved to explore Alaska. He usually visited for hunting trips each year, but this year was different. He and his friend Bill Bush loaded a bush plane on Kodiak Island and flew to a remote location approximately 30 miles away. They planned to hunt Sitka deer and Kodiak bears. They rented a hunting cabin in Viekoda Bay. It was a simple wooden cabin consisting of a single room which they had planned to use for a couple of weeks. Kodiak Island is an outdoor enthusiast paradise. Wide and varied habitats consisting of streams, lakes, wetlands, grasslands, spruce forests, and alpine meadows are home to an abundance of wildlife. Foxes, otters, beavers, and deer, as well as elk, pine marten, and more than 250 visiting bird species are found there. Of course, being so close to the Pacific Ocean, the rivers and streams are also full of migratory Pacific salmon, which make the journey across hundreds of miles from the ocean back to the rivers to spawn. This, in turn, attracts bears. The Kodiak bear, a subspecies of the brown grizzly bear, is the largest in the world, weighing in at 1,200 pounds and standing up to 10 feet tall on its hind legs. They are an impressive sight. There are 2 bear hunting seasons each year. The spring season is open from April through mid-May, and the fall season is from the end of October to the end of November. Matthew and Bill took a Zodiac inflatable boat across the water from their cabin to hunt Sitka deer in the mountains. The water was calm and still. The scenery was breathtaking. It wasn't long before they found their deer. In the forest, dappled with sunlit light, the deer was walking slowly through the colorful fall leaves, making barely a sound. Matthew held his breath, steadying his rifle, and took a clean shot. The doe was killed instantly and fell to the ground. He calmly walked over to the kill, field dressed it, and then dragged it down the mountain towards the water and their moored-up boat. From there, the 2 men would take the deer back to their lodge. On his way down the hill, through the trees and less than 100 yards from the shoreline, Matthew heard a noise. He glanced to his side. A young Kodiak bear came bursting through the undergrowth and jumped at Matthew. Initially, Matthew thought it was a mock charge and stood tall, but the bear came at him again. He turned his back on it and it hit him to the ground. The air was knocked from Matthew's lungs. Winded and shocked at the sudden attack, he shook his head, trying to make sense of the situation. Then Matthew felt an intense pressure on the back of his neck as the bear picked him up in its mouth, tossing him around like a rag doll. Flesh was ripped from Matthew's neck, the top of his spinal column showing through the gaping wound. Matthew summoned all of his Air Force training to keep calm and relaxed as his body was thrown around by this large cub. Finally, the bear threw him to the ground. Matthew played dead, face down in the dirt and amongst the autumnal leaves, but the bear wasn't finished with him yet. It placed a single paw on Matthew's back and slashed him with its other. Then, to Matthew's horror, another cub and its mother appeared. The mother was easily 8 feet long and began devouring the deer carcass. Matthew lay there, motionless on the ground. Should he stay lying there pretending to be another carcass? Should he run and hide? He decided he should try and scare the bears off. He jumped up and, waving his hands above his head, he began yelling at the bears. But they were not afraid. They merely looked up at him midway through their meal, jowls dripping. One cub ran over to Matthew, knocking him onto his back. It placed a heavy paw on Matthew's chest. An adult Kodiak bear's paw can measure up to 19 inches long. The pressure built on Matthew's chest as the full weight of the animal began to bear down on him. In a desperate attempt to fight it off, Matthew began punching it in its face, clawing it on the muzzle, and trying to gouge its eyes. He knew this was the end, and yet he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He prayed for his wife and children and closed his eyes, waiting for death to envelop him. He was at peace. But to his surprise, as the bear's huge jaws clamped down on him once more, it suddenly leapt backwards and ran back to the others. Its tooth seemed to have connected with Matthew's wedding ring, a strange sensation the bear was not familiar with. Just then, Bill appeared from deep in the woods. He was shouting Matthew's name. As his calls became louder, the bears fled. Astonishingly, Matthew stood up and stumbled down to the shoreline, falling at Bill's feet. Horrified at his friend's injuries, Bill helped Matthew into their boat, lying him on the cold, hard aluminum floor. Hurriedly, he started the engine and zoomed back across the water to their cabin. To Matthew, each wavelet hitting the hull felt like a heavy thud across his body. His wounds were gaping. Bone and tendons could be seen through the flow of blood. Matthew looked up at the sky. He felt the cold breeze on his face. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off now, and his injuries became excruciating. After what seemed like an eternity, they made it to the shore. Bill hauled Matthew out of the boat and carried him back to their hut. Once inside, Bill laid Matthew down and began tending to his wounds. Their small first aid pack provided little medical equipment, but they would have to make do. A single pot of aspirin was all the pain relief they had. There was no mobile phone reception in the area, and with no satellite phone, Bill tried desperately to make Mayday calls on the VHF radio, but the signal was too weak. They weren't due to be collected by the plane for another 3 days, and Bill didn't think his friend would last that long. At each passing hour, Matthew grew weaker. He sipped on the water in his camel pack, feeling his body warm up as infection began to engulf him. For 2.5 days, Matthew clung on to life. In and out of consciousness, he desperately needed medical attention. On the 3rd day, pilot Steve Larson was flying overhead. Hearing the distant rumble of an aircraft, Bill leapt out of the cabin with his radio. He spotted the plane in the distance and made the urgent Mayday call, and, to his relief, the pilot responded. A Coast Guard helicopter was sent to the men's position, and Matthew was airlifted to a nearby hospital. His injuries were so severe that he was then transferred to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage. Matthew had multiple operations to fix his broken body. He was given antibiotics to stave off the massive infection consuming him and received more than 140 staples to close up his wounds. After months of rehab, Matthew made a full recovery. He has returned to active duty in the Air Force and still, to this day, enjoys the wilds of Alaska. How to stay bear safe. Number 1, be alert and make noise to avoid surprising a bear. Number 2, hike in groups. Number 3, carry bear spray and have it on hand. Bear spray is much more effective than a bullet. Number 4, keep your distance if you see a bear. Number 5, if hunting or camping, store any food in bear lockers or high up in trees at a significant distance from your camp. Number 6, for a black bear, stand tall, gather together if in a group, and make loud noise. Number 7, for a grizzly bear, remain calm and back away very slowly.